Please, you have to help me. He's following me. He's been following me since I left the hospital.
Just take a deep breath. You're safe here.
He's right there. Don't let him take me.
Can I help you with something, sir?
The plane ticket trembled in Grace Whitfield's bandaged hand as two security guards walked her down the jet bridge, her neck brace digging into her skin, her ribs screaming with every step. She was being exiled from the hospital she had served for 9 years, silenced before she could tell a single soul what she had witnessed in operating room 4. And the man striding behind her, watching her every move with cold, calculating eyes, was the very person responsible for burying the truth. If you believe in kindness, in justice, and in second chances, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds a way out. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's go back to where it all began. Grace Whitfield had always wanted to be a nurse. Growing up in a small town outside Springfield, Missouri, she watched her mother battle cancer in a hospital that never seemed to have enough hands, enough time, or enough compassion to spare. She promised herself that if she ever had the chance, she would be the nurse her mother needed and never got. She kept that promise for 9 years at Beacon Ridge Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, working double shifts, holding the hands of dying patients, and memorizing the names of every family member who walked through her ward's doors. Beacon Ridge had a shining reputation. Its glass towers rose above the city skyline, its lobby smelled of fresh flowers, and its CEO, a sharply dressed man named Richard Calloway, appeared on local news segments talking about innovation in patient care. But behind the marble floors and framed award certificates, Grace had begun noticing things that did not add up. Medication counts that never matched. Surgical logs with times that seemed impossible. Patients who went in for routine procedures and came out changed, diminished, sometimes not at all. It started on a Tuesday night in March. Grace was assisting in operating room 4 when a patient named Harold Jennings, a 68-year-old veteran scheduled for a minor knee surgery, began crashing on the table. The attending surgeon, a man closely tied to Calloway's inner circle, panicked and made a call that Grace knew, with every fiber of her medical training, was wrong. She spoke up. She was told to be quiet. Harold Jennings died 40 minutes later, and by morning, his chart had been altered to say his death was due to a pre-existing heart condition that had never once appeared in his medical history. Grace could not sleep that night. She kept seeing Harold's family in the waiting room, his daughter clutching a rosary, his grandson too young to understand why his grandfather would never come home. She thought of her mother, of every family who trusted these hallways with their most fragile moments. So she did what any nurse with a conscience would do. She began quietly gathering evidence, photographing altered records during her breaks, keeping a small notebook hidden in her scrub pocket where she logged dates, times, and names. It took less than 2 weeks for someone to notice. She was called into Administrator Calloway's office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He sat behind a desk so polished she could see her own frightened reflection in it. His voice smooth as silk as he explained that her performance had become erratic, that patients had filed complaints about her conduct, that perhaps she was overworked and needed time away. Grace understood immediately that this was not concern. This was a warning wrapped in corporate language, and she was being told, without being told, to stop asking questions or face consequences. She did not stop. 3 days later, while transferring a patient in the hallway, Grace was struck by a maintenance cart that came around a corner far too fast, driven by a man she had never seen on staff before. She was thrown against a support pillar, fracturing 2 ribs, spraining her wrist, and injuring her neck badly enough to require a brace. The hospital's internal investigation ruled it an accident within 24 hours, an impossibly fast conclusion for any real inquiry. Grace knew, lying in a hospital bed in the very building she had devoted her career to, that this had been no accident at all. While she recovered, Calloway visited her room personally, flanked by two men in dark suits who said nothing and simply stood by the door like sentries. He told her, with a smile that never touched his eyes, that Beacon Ridge cared deeply about her well-being and that the hospital had arranged a fully paid transfer to a partner facility in Arizona, effective immediately, for her own health and safety. It was not a request. Within hours, security escorted her from her hospital bed to a car, and from the car to the airport, her belongings packed by strangers, her phone confiscated under the excuse of hospital property review. She was being disappeared in plain sight, dressed up as compassion. At the airport, sitting in a hard plastic chair with her ribs aching and her mind racing, Grace understood she had only minutes before she would be put on a plane and lost to a system designed to swallow inconvenient truths. She had no phone, no notebook, nothing but the clothes on her back and the bandages covering her wounds. But she had one thing left. Years earlier, during nursing school, Grace had volunteered with a program that trained hospital staff to recognize signs of trafficking and coercion in patients too frightened or restrained to speak. Among the techniques taught was a simple, deliberate hand signal, a closed fist pressed to the chest followed by fingers tucked over the thumb, a silent call for help that anyone trained to notice would immediately recognize. As Calloway approached the gate, walking toward her with that same practiced, reassuring smile, Grace turned toward a stranger sitting beside her, a broad-shouldered man in military fatigues named Sergeant Thomas Whitaker who was returning home to Ohio after a tour overseas. She pressed her bandaged hand to her chest and made the signal slow and deliberate, praying that somewhere in his training, in his years of service, he had learned to recognize it too. He had. Sergeant Whitaker's eyes sharpened instantly. He had spent 3 years working alongside military police trained in exactly this kind of covert distress signal, used by hostages, trafficking victims, and anyone silenced against their will. Without drawing attention, he shifted his body slightly toward Grace, a silent wall between her and the approaching CEO, and asked in a low, steady voice if she was safe. Grace, terrified but resolute, whispered just enough that she was a nurse, that she had evidence of a cover-up involving a patient's death, and that the man walking toward them intended to make sure she never spoke of it again. What Grace did not know was that Sergeant Whitaker was not simply a soldier heading home. He was there to meet his sister, an investigative journalist named Margaret Whitaker who worked for a Cleveland news station and had spent the last several months chasing rumors of malpractice cover-ups at major hospital chains across Ohio. When Margaret arrived at the gate minutes later, expecting a quiet reunion with her brother, she instead found him standing guard over a trembling, injured nurse with a story that could blow their entire investigation wide open. Calloway, sensing the shift in atmosphere, tried to intervene, claiming Grace was a former employee suffering a mental health episode who needed to board her flight for treatment. But Sergeant Whitaker, calm and immovable, simply said that no one would be boarding any plane until airport security and local police arrived to sort things out properly. Calloway's composure cracked for the first time, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he could smooth it away, and that flicker was all Margaret needed. She was already recording. Within the hour, Columbus police arrived at the gate, along with 2 detectives who had, unbeknownst to Calloway, already been quietly investigating Beacon Ridge following an anonymous tip from a hospital pharmacist weeks earlier. Grace, shaking but resolute, gave her statement on the spot, describing the altered charts, the death of Harold Jennings, and the mysterious cart accident that had left her broken and terrified. Margaret's recorded footage of Calloway's failed attempt to force a visibly injured nurse onto a departing flight became the spark that lit a firestorm. The story broke on Cleveland News the following morning and spread across the country within days. Investigators descended on Beacon Ridge Medical Center, seizing records, interviewing staff, and uncovering a pattern of falsified documents stretching back nearly 4 years, involving not just Harold Jennings, but at least 6 other patients whose deaths had been quietly mischaracterized to avoid liability and protect the hospital's spotless public image. Richard Calloway was arrested within the week on charges including obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy, his polished reputation collapsing overnight into headlines of scandal and betrayal. Harold Jennings' daughter, a woman named Patricia Jennings who had spent months quietly grieving a death she always suspected was more than it seemed, was finally given the truth she deserved. She reached out to Grace personally, tears in her voice, thanking her for refusing to stay silent even when silence would have been so much easier, so much safer. Grace, still healing, still wearing the neck brace that had once been dismissed as an inconvenience to hide away on a plane, told her simply that Harold deserved someone to speak for him, and that every patient did. Grace never did board that flight to Arizona. Instead, in the weeks that followed, she found herself supported by a wave of former colleagues who had been too afraid to speak up on their own, by grateful families who finally understood what had happened to their loved ones, and by Sergeant Whitaker and his sister Margaret, who became lifelong friends bonded by one impossible afternoon at an airport gate. Beacon Ridge Medical Center underwent a complete leadership overhaul, and new whistleblower protections were implemented across the hospital system, protections that would come to be known informally among staff as Grace's Law. If the story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that courage can live inside the quietest, most overlooked people, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing always matters, even when your hands are shaking and your voice feels small. Before we go, we would love for you to comment the word courage below if you believe Grace deserved to be heard, and if you believe that no one, no matter how powerful, should ever be allowed to silence the truth. In the end, Grace Whitfield went back to nursing, back to the small, sacred moments of holding a frightened patient's hand, back to the work she had always believed in. She carried a small scar on her wrist from that day, a quiet reminder that speaking up had nearly cost her everything, and had ultimately given her everything that mattered. She often said that the bravest thing she ever did was not fighting a hospital system or facing down a powerful man in a suit, but simply raising her hand to her chest and trusting that somewhere in a crowded airport terminal, someone would be watching closely enough to understand.